Good morning. Thank you a lot for allowing me to come here and to speak to you this morning. I know most of you here, however, over the past 11 months that I have been gone, the Lord has blessed our church with many new faces. We have been members of New Harmony Baptist Church for over 10 years. From the day we walked in the back door of this church and were greeted by Papa John, we knew that this church that we wanted to be a part of. This was the church that we wanted to be a part of. Since my accident, this feeling of belonging to this church has only been reaffirmed. I've been a funeral director and embalmer my entire professional career and worked for Cottle Rutledge Funeral Home in Lindale for the past 7 years. As a way of giving back to my community, I became a volunteer firefighter in 1984 when I joined the Kemp Volunteer Fire Department. When we moved to Lindale in 2000, I became a member of the Lindale Volunteer Fire Department. Over the past 30 years, I have trained in the fire service at various schools and became an instructor at the Texas A&M Municipal Fire School, along with Wood County Fire School, and recently with the Northeast Texas Firefighters Association Annual School at Texas Eastman in Longview. On January the 17th, 2014, my life and the life of my family changed forever. A little after midnight, the pager went off with the report of a structure fire just outside the city of Lindale. I responded to the station and was on the first engine out. We arrived on the scene to find a one-story brick structure approximately 50% involved in fire. The type of fire I had gone on many times in my career. I initially thought we'd be making a defensive attack on the fire. However, after doing a 360 observation of the structure, I found the garage, a kitchen area, and part of the living room that I felt we could save. My partner and I made an initial attack going into the garage and spraying water into the attic in an attempt to push the fire back to the burned part of the structure. We were not in the structure long when the next thing I knew, there was a loud noise and I felt myself falling to the floor. When I awoke, I realized that part of the ceiling joist, and a tremendous amount of debris that was all on fire had fallen on top of me. I knew I had to get out of the fire, so I started digging my way through the fire to try to get out from underneath the burning debris, and my hands began to burn. I was able to get to a void area where I could see a wall in front of me, but my air pack must have gotten wedged under the ceiling joist, preventing me from moving any farther. It was at that point that I realized I was more than likely going to die. My partner had called a mayday and activated what is called a RIT team, or a rapid intervention team, a rapid response team, as soon as the wall fell. However, I knew I was a good distance in the garage and that I was covered with debris. It was going to take the crew several minutes to get to me, and I knew that I was running low on air. At this point, I did the only thing that I knew to do. I prayed. I prayed a prayer that I have never prayed before in my life. I said, God, I don't deserve it. I did nothing on this earth to earn it, but please accept me into your heaven. Please forgive me for all the times that I sinned, because I know that I'm coming to see you in just a few minutes. Please take care of my family. It was at that point that I never, in my entire 51 years, felt as close as God as I did saying that prayer. I can't say that I saw a bright shining light reaching down for me, or that I saw a hand reaching out to grab me and pull me up. But I can say that I felt a sense of calmness and the presence of God all around me. After saying that prayer, I passed out from the exhaustion and the pain of digging my way out from under the debris. In Smith County, we have what is called an automatic aid system, which means that the two closest fire departments are paged to any structure fire at the same time we are called. By this time, most of the mutual aid companies had arrived on the scene. A young man named Caleb Snyder from Dixie Fire Department thought he knew where I was and made an attempt to rescue me. After receiving second-degree burns on his wrist, the fire was too hot and he had to retreat. After the Mayday was called, everyone on the fire ground was concentrating on trying to find me. A friend of mine and a member of this church who sits on the back row, the same row with me, and it's not the heathen side, it's not the side that Brother Robbie preaches to all the time, even though we feel like that sometimes. Trey Glover was walking near a window and saw my hand sticking up just inside the window. Trey began pulling the debris off me and was joined by Lindale firefighter Kenny Vent and others as they tried to dig the debris off of me. As one firefighter became tired, he rolled out of the way and another firefighter took over until they were able to lift the ceiling joist, freeing me from my air pack and my helmet and dragging me out the window. The next thing I remember is waking up on the ground, surrounded by firemen, removing my air pack and bunker gear. I remember looking up and seeing a young man that I have known since he first joined the fire department, Trevor Smurl. I remember asking Trevor, am I going to die? He replied to me in no uncertain terms, no, you are not going to die. He repeated that 3 or 4 times, at which time I guess I passed out again, because the next thing I remember was being loaded into the ambulance with Trevor right beside me. As I was being rolled into the ambulance, I recognized the paramedic on duty, a man named James Alcott. James told me that they were going to start an IV, and then he was going to give me some medicine to knock me out, and they were going to intubate me. I told James he was not going to intubate me. I first wanted him to see if I had any burns in my throat and nose, because I knew that if I did, I wasn't going to survive. By intubating me, they were just prolonging the suffering that my family would have to go through as I lay for days on a ventilator in the hospital. James told me my throat and nose were clear, and I had 30 seconds before he was going to intubate me. That was the last thing that I remember for 98 days. I have no recollection of my 98 days in Parkland Burn Unit. I can't remember the nurses, the doctors, or any of those days. On the third day at Zell Lipsey Hospital, I woke up, and I began the grueling task of figuring out what had happened and where I was. I knew when I woke up and I looked at my surroundings that I was in a hospital. When I looked down and I saw all the bandages and the tubes coming out of me, I knew I must have been hurt pretty bad. Denise and Nicole were great by the way that they slowly began to tell me what had happened. Denise started off by telling me that my face had been burned pretty badly. She gave me little bits and pieces so that I didn't have to digest the whole trauma of this all at one time. The first thing she told me was that my nose was badly burned. Then the next day she told me that most of my left ear had been burned off. Every day she would give me just a little bit of information to digest. It was at this point that I began to realize how seriously injured I really was. I began to do the only thing I knew to do. I prayed to God to help me get through it and to help me get well and to help me get home. Later on, Denise and Nicole had to tell me some devastating news. They told me that a few days after my accident, my aunt had passed away. My auntie is a very special person to me. She was always my favorite aunt. Every time we went back home to see family, I was always ready to go see Uncle Mud and Auntie. It was hard to take the fact that she had died and I was not there. Being a funeral director and involved in all my family's funerals, it really hurt that I wasn't able to be there for my family and to tell my auntie goodbye. A few days later, Denise told me what was probably the most difficult thing she had to say to me. My hands were burned very badly, and that I was going to lose all my fingers. This was the first time that I questioned God as to why this had happened to me and why He had let me live through this ordeal. Some people say to never question God, that we should just take whatever happens as His will and move on. I'm sorry, but I couldn't do that. I had to know why He took my fingers and why I was being put through this ordeal. The problem with questioning God is that it opens the door for the devil to come into your life, into your mind. The devil put the first thought in my mind that the reason that this happened was because God didn't love me. The next thing the devil did is he put into my mind that God was punishing me for all the bad things that I had done in my life. I have not always been a good person, so this fit into my thinking that God was punishing me. I spent the next few months thinking that this was a punishment. While visiting with Brother Robbie in the hotel one day, I shared these feelings with him. He asked me a couple of simple questions. First, Brother Robbie said, "Do you love Nicole?" I answered, "Yes, of course I love Nicole." Second, he said, "So would you do anything to intentionally hurt or harm Nicole?" I answered, "Of course not." He then said, "Why would your Heavenly Father, who loves you more than anything in this world, who gave His only Son to die on the cross for you, do anything to harm or hurt you?" This helped me tremendously. But I have to admit that sometimes I look back and I think, could it have possibly been a punishment? While in the rehab hospital, our days became very regimented. I had therapy 7 days a week for a minimum of 3 hours a day. We started every morning off the same. They came in at 7 for pills, vitals, and the usual medical stuff. Then Denise would get me dressed, and in the later days, I would move from the bed to a chair. She would read our daily devotionals to me. It had to have been a God thing because it seemed like every day the devotional fit the mood or feeling I was having that day. They would bring me breakfast, Denise and I would pray together, and start our day. When I got to Zale, I could not even sit up in the bed without help. For the first few days, all I had to do was lie in the hospital bed and think. When I wasn't talking to Denise or Nicole, I would pray and just talk to God about what was going on and what I was going to do. I was only in Zale a few days when they began my therapy routine. My therapist brought in what is called a Sarah Plus to lift me up and stand me on my feet. This was a very scary experience, and the whole time I was standing, I prayed to God continuously. Please don't let me fall. Please don't let me fall. I continued standing with assistance for several days, and then one Friday, my physical therapist, a young lady named Helen, told me, "Monday, we're going to take some steps." I replied, "That is impossible. I can't do that." Helen told me I could and was going to take steps on Monday, and I had all weekend to think about how I was going to do it and pray about walking. I spent the entire weekend praying to God and asking Him how I was going to do this. Bright and early Monday morning, Helen came into my room. She rolled the Sarah Plus to my bed, took the foot plates off so that I would be standing flat on the floor. She began to put the harness on me and asked, "Are you ready to take steps?" I told her, "Helen, there is no way I can do this." She replied, "Yes, you can. You are going to do this." I prayed to God to please help me. They lifted me up, and I started taking steps. These were the first steps that I had taken in over 100 days. One of the hardest things I had to do during my time at Zale was wound care. Wound care is when they take you to a room, transfer you into what is called the tank, which is nothing more than a tarp on a bed. They would remove all of my bandages and use forceps to remove dead tissue from my body. Then they would wet me down and start washing me. This was very painful. So painful that they would give me a shot of medication before I started this process. I hated wound care and had to do it 3 times a week. Every night before wound care, I would pray to God to help me through it and to relieve my pain. Denise told me of one of the devotionals she and Nicole read during my time in ICU that said, when you are in pain or in need, to simply whisper the word Jesus, and he would respond. Though that's what I began to do in wound care when the pain got too bad. I would whisper, Jesus, 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 and the pain and anxiety would subside. It was a great day when they told me I no longer had to go into the tank. On June the 22nd, they released us from Zale and sent us to the Homeward Suites to begin outpatient therapy. The move was very scary. Although Denise was already doing most of my care, it was the fact that there would not be a nurse or anyone to help us if we needed anything at the hotel. My first day of outpatient therapy consisted mostly of an evaluation. However, it didn't take long to realize that I had moved to a whole different level of therapy. This was going to be a challenge. In outpatient therapy, they expected more and didn't baby me like I had become accustomed to in inpatient therapy. During my PT evaluation with Gary, he asked me what my goals were. I told him that I wanted to run again. I was never a big runner or ran a marathon, but I did run a 5K and ran after work some days and wanted to be able to do that again. Gary looked me over, had me walk a few steps, and then he told me, that's going to take a lot of work. To which I replied, let's get started. That was the beginning of the Gary and Joe Challenge. Gary would push me to the limit every day. One of my favorite verses has always been Philippians 4:13, for I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. This would be a verse that I would repeat over and over many times a day, and Denise would remind me of this verse on several occasions. I remember the day Gary told me that we were going to jump. Jumping is nothing until you haven't done it for about 150 days. He put a 2-inch box in front of me to jump on. I thought I could do that, so I jumped and made it. Then he said that was too easy, and I needed to do a 4-inch jump. That did not look so easy. I looked up at the box, looked at the distance from the floor to the box, and turned and walked away for a moment. When I walked away, I prayed, Jesus, please help me make this jump and not fall. I went back, said my favorite verse, and made the jump successfully. A few days later, we were starting off with the 4-inch box, and then he put a 6-inch box down. I stepped up to the box, looked at the distance from the ground to the box, and turned around. I walked away, and I said again, Jesus, I don't know how I can do this. Please help me do this. I walked back to the box and made the jump successfully. Gary, to my astonishment, said, that's too easy. He put the 6-inch box on top of the 2-inch box. Again, I turned away and I prayed, Jesus, help me. And I made the jump successfully. This became the routine with several of the assignments Gary would give me. I would pray, Jesus, please be with me. Help me to do this. And he always did. I never failed to complete an assignment that Gary gave me. One day I walked into the therapist's office to pick at them and say goodbye. For some reason, during the conversation, I started running in place. Gary looked shocked and said, do you realize what you just did? I replied, no, not really. And he said, tomorrow we run. I lied awake a lot that night, asking God, how am I going to do this? We arrived at therapy the next day and went outside. Gary said, run. It is only with the help of Jesus Christ that I was able to run to the end of the walkway, turn the corner, and run a little bit further than Gary had asked me to run. My OT therapist was a young lady Nicole's age named Annabeth, and a Baylor grad, by the way, sick 'em bears. OT involves a lot of stretching and teaching you to do things on your own and not as physically exerting as PT. Annabeth is one of the sweetest people I've ever met and a devout Christian. We would talk a lot about her church and scriptures she was reading and studying in her church. Annabeth pushed me and challenged me to be more independent. She started by teaching me how to put my shirt on and eventually to completely dressing and undressing myself. When we went home for the weekend one time, she sent a list of things she wanted me to do to be by myself so that I could stay by myself and allow Denise to return to work. I accomplished all of these tasks, and we're on track for Denise to return to work next week. As you know, shortly after my accident, Allison Rutledge made a half-dozen yard signs saying, "Pray for Joe." When people saw the signs, she was inundated with calls from people wanting signs for their yards. She was so overwhelmed that she could not keep up and reached out to the Chamber and Shelby and others, along with school organization and other businesses, to help. Within a matter of days, the signs were all over the city. Businesses around the community also put "Pray for Joe" on their signs. People traveling through were stopping at businesses and asking what the signs were all about. We were forwarded pictures of our entire congregation at church holding a "Prayer for Joe" sign. It is no doubt that the thousands upon thousands of prayers that were lifted up for me is what helped me survive. I cannot say enough for the support of my family and friends. My family in West Texas, who came to visit me on several times. My awesome and sweet mother-in-law, who brought us food every week so that we would not have to eat out every day. All of this would not have been possible had it not been for my Lord Jesus Christ. My wife Denise, our daughter Nicole, and my son-in-law Andrew. Nicole was living in McKinney when the accident happened and teaching in Prosper. She would go to school and then come to the hospital and visit me and take my laundry home with her. She did this every day for weeks on end. On the weekends, Andrew would come to see me and have encouraging things to say to me and brighten my day. He never complained about having to spend his time with me in the hospital instead of with his newlywed wife. I love them both very much. My wife Denise is totally amazing. Denise only left my side 3 times during the entire time I was in the hospital. And on those 3 occasions, she had no other option but to leave me and take care of other business. She went to every single therapy session with me and would pull up a chair and sit or assist the therapist. She also went to every single wound care appointment that I had. I know that had to be very difficult. Even though they gave me medication for the pain, some days it was unbearable, combined with the fact of her having to see all of my open wounds. But she never left my side. She never cried in front of me, although sometimes I know she wanted to. She stood strong so that I could get through the ordeal. We have been married for over 30 years. I have always loved Denise, but I think our love for each other has grown over the past few months. Denise has taken care of every single need and has not once complained about having to help me do every single thing. Brother Robbie, I'm supposed to stop at this point. I wasn't supposed to tell you this. She told me not to say this, but I have to say it anyway. The Bible talks about Ruth and says, "Who can find a more virtuous woman?" I believe every single word in the Bible is the written word of God, written by man, but is the word of God. And I'm not going to ever question or say anything against the word of God. But I think that I have found a woman that is almost as virtuous as Ruth. Denise has stood beside me every single minute of every single day. She's never left me, and I thank God for her. Also, looking at the back of the room, this isn't in my notes either. I'm kind of ad-libbing here. I see my good friend, Chief Garner. Chief Garner has been with us. Miss Garner passed away the night before this accident, so he had a lot on his plate. But he has never left me. Every week he brought us our mail. Nearly every day he called to check on us, and he still comes by to see me every day. Chief, thank you for all you've done for me and my family. One day, a psychiatrist, even though I said I'd never see a psychiatrist, I'll admit, it wasn't an option. She just walked in my room. Kim Roden came to visit me while I was at Zale. Dr. Roden became a very important part of my recovery. During one of our visits, she recommended a book by Harold S. Kushner, who, by the way, is a Jewish rabbi. The book is entitled, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. Kushner states that the idea that God gives people what they deserve, that our misdeeds cause our misfortune, is a neat and attractive solution to the problem of evil at several levels. But it has a number of serious limitations. It teaches people to blame themselves. It creates guilt even where there is no basis for guilt. It makes people hate God, and it even makes them hate themselves. And most disturbing of all, it does not even fit the facts. I struggled with blaming myself for the accident and for the pain and suffering that my family has endured. However, Kushner goes on to state that maybe God does not cause our suffering. Maybe it happens for some reason other than the will of God. The psalmist writes, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. Psalms 121, 1 and 2. He does not say, my pain comes from the Lord, or my tragedy comes from the Lord. He says, my help comes from the Lord. Kushner poses the question, could it be that God does not cause the bad things that happen to us, but rather that he stands ready to help us cope with our tragedies if we could only get beyond the feeling of guilt and anger that separate us from him? Could it be that how could God do this to me is really the wrong question to ask, for us to ask? One answer he provides is that it may be that God finished his work of creating eons ago and left the rest to us. Residual chaos, chance, and mischance, things happening for no reason, will continue to be with us. We will simply have to learn to live with it and sustained and comforted by the knowledge that the earthquake and the accident, like the murder and the robbery, are not the will of God, but represent the aspect of reality which stands independent of his will and which angers and saddens God, even as it angers and saddens us. I have told you this story today, not for you to feel sorry for me or to have pity upon me, but to see what our Lord and Savior and family and friends and a church have done to help me improve. I am getting stronger every day, and I will continue to improve. It is, however, my hope today that no one will leave this church, this building, without knowing the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior. Life is so short, and as evident in my life, can change in the flickering of an eye. When I went on that fire on January the 17th, I never expected it to be anything other than an ordinary structure fire, Mr. Barron, one you and I have been on thousands of times. I would hope that each and every one of you, if faced with death, as I was, would be able to say that same or a similar prayer and feel God wrap his arms around you and say, I'll take care of you. If you don't know that for certain today, please don't leave here without coming down front and talking with Brother Robbie, talking with one of our deacons, or someone that you know has the free gift of eternal life. It has been an honor and a privilege to talk to you today. I love this community, and I love New Harmony Baptist Church. Thank you, and may God bless each and every one of you.